So I'm going to tell you a story that I wrote that I titled For a Time with My Dad. My folks had just made one of their first major family decisions to leave the security of family, friends, jobs, and all that goes with the life we've made in our hometown for a chance for my dad to be principal of a K through 8th grade school in a tiny town in Northern California named Orleans. At the time, I did not realize how much that one decision and the succession of decisions after that would change my life forever. You see, it was also decided that out of the three boys, I was chosen to accompany Dad on that main move trip. After we took most of our belongings up in the U-Haul, Dad and I were to make our own new home ready for Mom and my other two brothers, who would join us in a couple of weeks. When the specialness of this time with my dad first hit was when we stopped for lunch on that first day at the L&M Cafe in Red Bluff. I had been from our hometown of Rodeo to Red Bluff many times, but by far this was different. Almost overnight, it seemed I went from being a 10-year-old kid to Dad's helper. No, actually partner. I was part of the team. Dad, our team leader, was including me in all the plans of how life was going to be in the next few weeks. It was right then, in that restaurant, that my focus changed. I realized that for a time I had with my dad all to myself, and I was going to make the most of it. It made me feel a little older, now just more capable, to have Dad talk with me and not at me. The stretch of road between Red Bluff and Orleans, for me, was uncharted. I secretly took it upon myself to remember every landmark, every turn, every new town that we came to along the way. I had a new sense of responsibility, for now it was just me and my dad. We actually got help from my uncle, who drove the other truck with our belongings, but I knew he would have to leave after we unloaded. The further we went, the smaller the towns got, and the roads got more narrower, windy, and even in bad repair. All this wilderness was new to me. The road followed the Trinity River and then the Klamath River, where the winter storms cut gorges through the land, leaving steep, slide-prone hillsides where the evidence of heavy logging could be seen. Windy, narrow, slide-prone roads doesn't leave a lot of room to maneuver your vehicle around a logging truck, and there were plenty of them. After we passed a little place called Hoopaw, I was informed that the next town was ours. It was a good thing because the road looked like it was about ready to end soon anyway. One of my first and lasting memories of rolling into our new hometown was a red spray-painted line on a big pine tree beside the road, actually across from where we turned into our new house. With the Klamath River to my right, just downhill from the road, I stared up at that red line a good 20 feet up from the base of the tree, and as we made the slow left-hand turn into the driveway, I read the words above the line, high water mark. The previous winter's heavy rain of 1964 had caused the Klamath to rage over its banks, taking with it the main bridge across the river and many houses. The school was used as a makeshift shelter for the flood victims, and unfortunately, faulty wiring caused it to burn down, taking what little some people had left. Our new home was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath teacherage, which sat just behind the school, and after unloading what we needed to make for a decent night's sleep, we all turned in for an exhausting drive to the wilds of Orleans. I can remember things about those 2 weeks like I lived them just yesterday. My uncle slept in the other bedroom, so I got to sleep in Dad's bed. As I lay there, I could hear the clanking of machines and conveyor belts and the gentle roar of a huge fire. So we didn't have any curtains on the windows, of course, and I was looking out that back bedroom window, looked out on the town's lumber mill. Back then, they still burned the waste wood in this big incinerator, and it would roar and shoot up big sparks in the sky and make the whole area around us glow orange. Through my eyes, I saw the wilderness, the unpredictable nature of fire, all contained in that incinerator. It made me feel strong that I was so close to something so fearful, but I seemed so safe with its containment. Another big difference that I noticed was how black the sky was, and how many more stars there seemed to be. I had left a home in the Bay Area with its millions of streetlights that covered up the stars to a one streetlight town that allowed me to see a different world. After finishing up unloading the truck the next day, we said goodbye to my uncle. That was it. Dad and I were truly on our own, relying on each other. I remember Dad always asking me to walk down to the store. One time he asked me to walk down to the store to get a loaf of bread because we were out. I couldn't miss it. It was just one road through town. The store was next to the one gas station just down the road past the post office, and that was all there was to the town of Orleans. It was on the walk towards the store that I had my first big scare of life in the wilds. There, sitting on a big log alongside the road, was a kid, an Indian kid, with a big knife. He was about my age, and he was staring at me and kept plunking that knife into that log at the same time. I kept walking, but I would sneak a peek to see if he was going to cross the road and jump me. He didn't, but in my search for the bread aisle, I saw a glass case filled with knives. I knew I had to have one, just to survive in this town. The one that looked good was about 9 inches long, had a wooden handle, and a 5-inch blade. It sold for, I think, $10.25. I knew I didn't have that much, but I knew I wanted it, I needed it, and I would earn the money to buy it if it was the last thing I did. It was bad enough being the new kid in town and being a white kid, but it got worse when I had to carry that sack of bread past the Indian kid with the knife. He was still plunking that knife in the log. If the store clerk would have only put the loaf of bread in a brown paper sack, he wouldn't have guessed that I got sent down to the store just for bread. These things are real important to a 10-year-old. There he was, still on that log, but now he was smiling at me, probably laughing to himself. I later learned his name was Virgil McLaughlin, and he and I actually became best friends. The days were filled with work at the school and making the new house acceptable to Mom. The construction crew were building the new school, but they didn't finish it until way after school started that year. This was just one school and many to follow in future years, where I helped Dad get either classrooms or whole new schools ready for students and teachers. There was nothing else like the smell of a new classroom. Maybe it's the carpet or the wax on the tile floors mixed with the acoustic wall panels and the new book smell. That was the job I liked the most, numbering the new books. Every book had to be coded with a number on the outside and on the inside with a magic marker. The sense of importance of keeping those numbers straight, remembering what number to write, and being so careful to write the numbers perfectly was very meaningful to me at that age. I can still hear the sound that a brand new, never before opened book makes when you open the front cover and then listen to the magic marker squirk over the fresh page, and the feeling of knowing that I was the very first person to open that book. Dad would tell me how many desks to put in each classroom, and it was up to me to see that all the desks were in perfect line and spaced out at the same distance between the desks. I opened up countless boxes of paper and other supplies to stock each classroom and the supply room. I remember liking to do these things because as you worked, you could see the results of your work quickly. With each completed task, you could see a more complete classroom. I felt the need to do my best so that the kids and the teachers would be proud of their school and proud of Dad. I kept daily tabs on my personal bank account. I knew how much I had and how much to expect for a weekly allowance, but what I needed to get that knife was some extra work. I began to be creative in finding things to do for Dad, but it wasn't all work in those 2 weeks. I remember Dad and I going deer hunting together. We were definitely living in bear country. They would come out of the forest around our house and go through our garbage, rattling around and making sleep a little nerve-wracking. And for entertainment, we would go up to the dump and watch the dump bears go through and eat people's leftovers. But once we actually put the pistol, Dad's .357 Magnum, in the truck and drove around looking for one. We did see a little bear, but he got up the bank from the road and into the woods too quick on us. He also took me trout fishing in a little creek just on the edge of town. Dad took great pains in instructing me in every facet of fishing, from hook tying to size and length of leader to presentation. I was to sneak up to a hole, cast in the white water, and then when your line is at a 45-degree angle, a fish should bite. Well, I took in everything he said because I knew this was one of these big lessons in life. If something were to happen to Dad up here in the wilds, I would have to know how to catch fish for our family. That's how important I was taking all this training in anyway. So when I finally trusted with Dad's trout pole, I tried hard to do everything just right. And you know, at exactly 45 degrees, a fish did bite, and I hooked him. The training on playing that fish and setting the drag didn't sink in, though, and it was all a blur after I hooked him. Dad was trying to tell me to do 3 things at once, and this fish is trying to break my line at the same time. It all happened so fast, but yet there was time for intensity, drama, adrenaline rush, and then he got off. My heart sank. I had failed the test that we had just discussed. I was not a provider, and I cried. There were so many things I remember, and I had done most of them, but I failed to actually land the fish. Dad knelt down, put his arm around me, and he told me it was okay, and then there was plenty more fish in that creek, and that I should simply just try it again. Well, I did try it again, and probably caught and landed a fish that day, but the detailed account of hooking, fighting, and then losing that first fish is and will be forever etched in my mind. Another neat experience that Dad and I shared in those 2 weeks was Sunday worship. There was a church located just in front of the school that they were building and within walking distance to our home. I believe it was the last Sunday before the rest of the family was to join us. Dad informed me that we were going to church. So now there was another church in town that we would have had to drive to, but when we left the house, we walked right by the truck and headed towards the empty church. I don't know why this church was not being used by the townspeople, but Dad had a key to the door. When we entered that big church, the specialness of the event started to become apparent. There we were, all by ourselves in the quietness of that holy place with its stained glass windows, huge wood beam rafters. Our voices echoed when we talked. At first I felt uneasy. Then I realized there were no other people, no other distractions, just me and Dad and God. As we sat down on the front pew, I realized Dad had a whole worship service planned out. He set up a record player and somehow produced a record of spiritual hymns. We sang along with the music. We read some scriptures, and Dad took the time to discuss God's word with me. That hour that I spent in that church with Dad made me feel closer to my dad and my God than I've ever felt before. Yet another scene in the videotape of the memories of life that I will never, ever forget. That 2 week period of my life, just me and my dad, has enriched my life in ways that makes it a pleasure to recall. Towards the end of the 2 weeks, I finally had earned enough money to buy that knife that I had to have. I remember the excitement of walking to the store, knowing I would be walking back with my knife. I was proud to finally be able to tell the store owner that I'd like to buy that knife instead of I'd just like to see that knife again. I paid for it and even had a few cents change. When I got home with it, I made a beeline to find a whittle stick. Dad sat down with me and instructed me in the proper use of knives. The most important thing to remember: carve away from you. Never draw the knife towards you. So now on our living room floor, we had placed a zebra skin rug that was given to us from my missionary uncle when he was in Africa. On this precious rug is where I chose to try out my new knife. It didn't take long to get frustrated with that stick. Temptation overtook me, and all the instruction of proper whittling was violated, and I started to whittle, drawing the knife towards the hand that was holding the stick. It didn't take long, maybe 3 or 4 strokes, and it happened just like my dad said it would. At first I was scared to say anything, but then I saw the blood from my thumb dripping on the zebra rug. Double trouble. I called out to Dad, and he helped me to the bathroom where the floor would be easier to clean up. He wanted to see how deep the knife went, so he opened up the slice in my thumb. My mistake was also observing the damage. Everything went black, and I crumbled into Dad's arms. When I came to, my head was between my knees, and he had a tight grip on my thumb. He stopped the bleeding and wrapped it up. I figured my knife was history for a while, but Dad just reiterated the proper techniques of whittling, and we both cleaned up the blood on the rug. I never broke those rules of whittling again, not so much for me, but because Dad let me off the hook and didn't confiscate my knife that first time that I misused it. I was glad when the rest of the family finally joined us. Glad to be able to show my other brothers all the neat things in me and Dad's domain. The events that happened in that 2 week time period must have been very important to me to be able to remember them like it was yesterday. The specialness of sharing life, of having a parent all to yourself for a certain amount of time, is something that had a profound meaning on my life. I will see to it that my kids will get the chance to spend time, each one, alone, for a time with Dad.